Oh, hey, hi. Sound engineer Alex Contel speaking. It looks like we're running a little bit behind in our schedule. So, this week, we're going to run one of our most listened episodes. Episode 253 Teaching Agency. Enjoy!
This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, Joey asks me about teaching agency.
Woo! I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world. Life in plastic. It's fantastic. This is what Joey sounds like. And this is what an executive producer and Swedish pop band member Jess Vander sounds like.
Hi, this is Jess. What makes a Swedish pop band member different from all other pop band members?
I think it's like mostly the Swedish.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like, yeah, I think it's mostly the mostly
Like actually 90% Swedish. The sort of Swedish.
Yeah, it's like predominantly the Swedish. We don't have.
Speaking of,
any
I'm really
housekeeping,
curious.
I don't think.
Oh, I actually do on the subject
you
of
do.
Swedish. I'm really interested to know if anyone has any intel listening on people's feelings about Trader Joe's Scandinavian swimmers, which you can imagine how the Swedish fish people feel. And I would just like to pose that question if anyone has any information on sort of the scandal of the Scandinavian swimmer. I would love to know about it. That is all.
I don't like that name. I don't like it.
Yeah. People have many thoughts. Some people say, and I don't know if you've seen this, speaking of Trader Joe's, they came out with their customer top favorites. Oh, I'm butchering what the actual name of it, but it was something along the lines of like, customers, the People's Choice Awards for Trader Joe's products. I do believe it is up there, and that people might have feelings about that. I don't know. Who's to say? But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, having gone through, like the whole like in vitro process and all of that, the swimmers is a very common euphemism that the professionals use to refer to.
This makes a different image
andrology tests
of
and
this
things
candy.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so people, the Swedes, anyone who's gone through IVF, those groups of people probably have lots of feelings about Scandinavian. Also professional.
I also just imagine like a turn of the 18th or the 19th to 20th century, like bather in like a striped bathing suit in Stockholm somewhere, just jumping in the water in like the singlet
red
shape.
and white stripes.
I digress.
Yeah, some big
yeah.
Got it. Okay, now we digress on the digression.
Got it. Jessica.
Jessica.
I saw something recently that was I don't know whether it's interesting or what it was, but it was like a bunch of people reacted. Someone had posted 2 pictures of this like question, like one of the cheesy, like, can you figure out this math equation? Only, whatever 2%
only
of the population
10%
can solve
smartest
this.
people. Yeah.
Yeah. But like a few people had responded to it being like, this is impossible to answer. And someone took that upon themselves to respond. And I'm going to read Mimetic Sisyphus's response to this.
Oh my goodness.
Question, whatever.
I'm already groaning.
Not an endorsement for Mimetic Sisyphus, at Mimetic Sisyphus. It said, some things I've noticed with newer hires and when I was a manager, there's an epidemic of people who are paralyzed by having to make obvious assumptions. Here we have two people saying, look how smart I am, I brought an alternative answer. But in the workplace, I found these employees are constantly unable to complete tasks because they weren't fully articulated in insane detail, or they encountered an unexpected roadblock and just give up. The strangest part, they don't seek out help to resolve these issues. It's a computer freeze. They just wait till someone notices to be restarted. And it was interesting for me because there have been points where I've encountered that type of thing. I don't know whether I would consider it an epidemic or anything like that, but it also matched some of the conversations that people have written about in recent years around, in things we've even discussed here, Gen Z's lawnmower parents or helicopter parents or whatever, like resolving issues for them, or the sort of like hyper surveillance of Gen Z, and they're coming into the workforce and having, had life 360 from their parents and everything else. This idea of like low agency, like the feeling that, you don't have the reins to resolve problems by yourself necessarily, or whatever it was. And it made me wonder about sort of the responsibility of managers and people in positions where they have some amount of responsibility of teaching, incoming younger people on the job. Like, what's our responsibility to teach agency for the next generation of workers?
You may not immediately understand how this relates to in-flight Wi-Fi, but I must share an anecdote that this immediately took me to. I don't know if you've ever, you have almost certainly tried to get onto plane Wi-Fi in your life. Yeah.
Yes, I have.
Great, cool. Which I think is notoriously unreliable. And I was having a conversation with Ryan about this in the most recent instance where I had, after going through the steps to log into in-flight Wi-Fi, and then it's like, okay, cool, you're in, and then nothing, and it's like not working. And other people similarly experiencing this. Obviously, at some point, someone hails down the person is like, hey, the Wi-Fi isn't working. And the flight attendant is like, oh, thank you for letting us know. I will restart it and it should work again. And that's exactly what happened. Apparently, there is this phenomenon where the only solution to fixing frequent in-flight Wi-Fi issues is by actually restarting, because there is a cache buildup problem, basically, of the number of like different users who are logging in that overwhelms the system. And the only option then is to just like go back to the beginning. And I just thought that this was the craziest agreed upon solution to solve this problem, that you have to wait around for someone to be like, hey, excuse me, this is broken. And they're like, oh, great, good. It's time to reset the cache. Like, that feels like an incredibly inefficient problem, in the same way that, for this example, it takes potentially some outside instigator to acknowledge, to shake up this sort of like frozen computer that's like, I can't compute this issue. And the fact that the solution is someone just being like, hey, we should probably fix this thing. And they're like, great, we can do that. So I had to share this small anecdote because I do think it's related, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's related, and it is. I mean, what you're talking about is sort of like an unresilient system, right? Like the system has like a known issue that is non-resilient, and like the famous like reseat the power or like unplug it and plug it back in of like IT professionals everywhere, where they're like, I don't know, you like restart the computer resolves like 95% of the issues, or like the cards that come into like an IT team. But this idea of like systems being more resilient are sort of like creating fail safes. And in the same way, I think for people, it is that idea of like creating more agency in people to resolve their own problems, as opposed to, and I'm like very hyper aware of how this can sound like a person of a certain age type of problem, or like
Sure.
like cross-generational issues of the past, but I don't really like, my sentiment around it isn't like young people these days like man yells at cloud. Like that really isn't how I feel about it. It's like you're always going to be a product of a system that is bringing you up, and if the system wasn't like teaching you agency, then at some point you have to get it from somewhere. So I don't like, it is not like a these dang kids like type of thing, you know what I mean?
I hear you. I think that's why maybe to me the thing that I'm drawn towards more is not the thing that potentially someone lacks, but the thing that people have. And I'd argue it's sort of the role of inhibition in the system that is kind of interesting here. Like how inefficient inhibition can be in like the example of the in-flight Wi-Fi, where it's like whoever's willing to raise their hand, like the sooner someone raises their hand and is like, hey, you need to reset the Wi-Fi, that will solve the problem. And it's just a waiting game of like, who's willing to say that, right? Like, some of it is knowing that that's the way the system works, that the system requires you to raise your hand. But I think it's a pretty good analogy for like, hey, question, is there anything else that I'm missing here? Or like as a way to sort of remove obstacle and move things forward, right? Like it can be so debilitatingly intimidating to not know how it works, or like I'm not sure if I should, or then maybe you have some completely external concern about how you're going to come across to a certain person, or all these other things. Like I, as a socially anxious person, I can relate to that. But it's just interesting how maybe it doesn't necessarily have to come from a place of like, oh, I don't feel I'm not resilient enough, and it's more like I am so afraid of what I don't know, or the unintended consequences that me having some assertion might bear.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to like, I think the inhibition point is a really good one, because that question of like, are you someone who feels like you have a lot of agency? Like, are you a in quotes high agency individual? Is based on like how frequently you are encountering inhibitors that will actually prevent action, versus viewing them as sort of impediments, but not things that like completely stop the system. And I realized as you were talking that I'd saved like some other thing a few months ago of someone having just like sharing a thread of like a bunch of high agency examples. And one of the ones that like stuck out to me, I think, as an example of how like low agency can be trained, was this thing where someone had someone named John Waitskin, who I don't know who they are, but they were like in an interview, and this idea of like them observing other parents saying like, oh, we have good weather today, or we have bad weather today, right? This idea of like, if there's bad weather, you can't go outside and play, or you can't do anything, or you have to be confined to the home or whatever, versus just being like, there is weather and you can make choices based on that, right? Like that old sort of adage of like, I think you've brought this up before. There's no such thing as bad weather. There's only bad gear, or like a lack of preparedness. Like if you think about people who like go hiking a lot or spend a lot of time in the outdoors, like what their mentality often is just like, just be prepared, right? Like, or, encounter the situation. And I had heard this same idea in the past, and I tried to like instill that in Emerson. And so like we, ride on the bike to and from like school, whether it's good weather or bad weather. And it's just like, you're even right. I'm even doing it, right? Like if it's raining or if it's not raining, and just, wear like a rain suit instead. But that idea of like, if you internalize those things like good weather, bad weather, like I can go outside today or I can't, like you're instilling a new inhibitor of action. And it's like maybe a banal example, but I think it sort of fits.
Right. And that makes a ton of sense too, because of our innate craving to establish rules that can always be applied. I think it's like the more rules you develop, like the people for whom the inhibitor is a fear of retaliation because of who you are or what you look like. And maybe, you develop a rule in your head of like, well, that applies in this circumstance too. And therefore I should never say anything, right? Or like I should never offer up an answer that could be wrong or be vulnerable, because it's really, it's not worth the risk, or maybe it feels like it isn't, depending on what contexts you have experience with. Like, I think that's the other thing is like, sometimes if you get that wrong, that can be like, depending on the thing that we're talking about, like that can be hugely disastrous, right? And so like, those inhibitors could be super powerful and justified for people. And that's the other thing is like, it's easy to be like, oh, well, you should just feel more, you can do this, but it's like, also, how do you create an environment that is persuasive enough to a person that this is unlike other environments? This pop band is unlike all other pop bands.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the question, like I'd seen in that same thread, there was something written by someone named George Mack about like how to spot high agency people. And it's like they had weird teenage hobbies, because they were willing to go against social pressures and engage in like weird things. They, they're the type of person, like if you think in your own life, if you got caught in a third world prison for some reason, like who would you call to help you like figure out how to, handle the situation? You can never guess their opinions because they're not like so consistent. They're sort of case to case, and they're willing to like break with convention. They said you niche content as opposed to things that like already have like high social engagement. They're mean to your face and nice behind your back as like an example, right? Which fits with like an inhibitor. There's an inhibitor that says that you should be like super nice to someone's face. And if you had to, like, and so it's like flipping of that inhibition model, right?
It's so funny because some TikTok appeared on somewhere. Why did I say it like that? That was making fun of the construct of a character of a person who's never experienced trauma, like like engaging in theoretical conversations and being like completely oblivious to how they might be coming across. But it was interesting as you're just sharing that, like the premise that high agency people could emerge as a result of like extreme privilege and naivete, but it could also emerge from like extreme trauma and like someone who is so resilient that they have actually like shed those inhibitions and fears, and they're just like, yeah, I mean, like I can figure this out. And to think that those extremes can actually both create ripe environments for someone to be like, yeah, sure, I'll say what I think. Like I'll give it a go.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately too, right? Like like having encountered hardship feels like, and like how you resolve hardship feels like one of those like key cases against sort of like the lawnmower parenting mentality of like, that idea is like basically trying to prevent your child from going through bad things. But what we all know sort of collectively is like bad things happen. Like life isn't always fair. And, at some point you're not going to be able to avoid some form of hardship. Like it will truly be out of someone's control. But that willingness to like not be stopped by a no and to like continue pursuing a thing. And I think, like obviously there are boundaries to that idea, right? Like we've been building up like a lot of language around consent in romantic relationships, which I think is like very important and powerful and is a demonstration of actually high agency of, choosing when or you do or don't want to participate in something. But at the same time, when you are, like going to a store and someone says like, this thing can't be done, and you're like, I think it can be done, and you find like a new solution around it. Like that's like a demonstration of not letting a barrier be like a wall, like that there's like a ladder somewhere to get over that wall if you can find it. And that question of like, how do you teach someone? It feels like the hardship has to be part of the process of like learning the agency of like being told no is part of how you understand that like no is not always the answer. Maybe it's just that that person couldn't help you, or that way that you were looking at the problem wasn't the right way.
Right. I mean, certainly knowing some people who have recently become parents, they think about this question a lot. And it takes me to what the professional equivalent of this story that is famous in Ryan's family, where when he was younger, for breakfast one day, it was waffles. And his request was that, can I have ice cream with my waffles? And his parents were like, no, ice cream is not breakfast. And he was like, well, does it not have like equal sugar content as syrup, and also potentially has nutritional value because it's dairy? And they were like, actually, like fair point made, like, okay. And thus Ryan had ice cream with his waffles for breakfast, which feels like the ladder to the wall concept. And like, how do you reward that kind of like sort of sidestepping behavior is kind of fair of like, actually, you don't want to encourage someone to distrust every no they hear, because that's not great. But you also do want to reward, creative thinking and persistence. It's very difficult. And how do you do that in a professional workspace where people are coming in from totally different starting points?
Yeah, I think, for like us, it's always like the willingness to, and like the openness to accept when you're wrong, like particularly as a leader, where you're like, I think we should do this. And someone's like, actually, maybe we should think about it this way. And you're like, nope, that's better. Great. Like, I think not being deterred by a no has to come with like the equal like willingness to be like inhibited on what was a yes, like your own yes, to be like, say no to yourself and turn to someone else's yes. And like, I don't know what the best way to help to teach people agency, but it does feel like a thing that can be learned in a work environment, but that would also have sort of like positive outcomes for someone beyond work. Like if you can help someone to feel like they have more agency over their own situation in work, like theoretically, like they should probably get benefits in like their personal life, or like in their friend groups or romantic groups or with their family or whatever,
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I think that brings us to Jess's agency corner.
Picture this. You're looking at a wall. It looks like a wall. You knock it. It feels like a wall. I don't know what a wall smells like, but it probably smells like that too. Doesn't mean you can't look around to see what other tools you have to break through. Maybe it's one of those extremely accurate visual replicas of a wall that also looks like it's structurally sound but is actually held up with pipe cleaners. Have you thought of pipe cleaners recently? Probably not, but now that I've serviced that for you, like now you're thinking about pipe cleaners. Are those really used to clean pipes? This is a great question. Use your creative thinking. Who knows? Maybe you'll find out more answers and get more yeses that way. Or maybe you won't, and you'll be stuck on a plane with no internet. Or whatever.
Yeah. Analyze every now. Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Brought to you by the Agency, where you can come be who you want to be.
Agential. As always, we'd like to thank our executive producer and special agent, Jess Vander.
You're welcome. We'd also like to thank sound engineer and to zero inhibitions, Alex Contel.
We'd like to thank our programming coordinator and secret agent for the ice cream agency, Les Jacobs.
And thanks to our production crew and the entire Scandinavian swim team, Sarah Gilbert and Nora Mestrid.
As always, thanks, Len.
Thanks, Len.
Special thanks to Scandinavian swimmers, I guess.
You know, people have sort of just a devoted fandom. I've also learned recently there's a sour version if you're a sour person. So I don't know. You're gonna have to figure out this. Speaking of, fun fact, Swedish Fish and Sour Patch Kids are the same base candy. Mind blown? Not like the craziest thing you've ever heard. Like it was for me.
I did not. I guess kind of checks out. Yeah.
Thanks to trivia, for as much as it completely humiliates me as somebody who is just like terrible at it, I think it's still really fun and great. So thanks, trivia.
Thanks, trivia. Well, I think that's it. We're grateful.
Yep. Yeah, we are.
Love you, mean it. Bye.
Well, okay, see you. Bye. Brought to you by... Oh, shoot. I had one and then I didn't like it halfway through. Let me try again.